Wei, a lot of engineers, architects, technical professionals, they transition into project management without formal training. If someone were to do that, what do you think are some of the common challenges that they're going to face? And how can they kind of develop the skills that they need to get around that and to be able to manage projects effectively?
I think one of the best ways to get your feet wet is not to actually go into the project immediately. So whether you are starting a project from scratch or whether you're a new project manager.
Did you know that over 70% of large-scale AEC projects exceed their budgets and schedules? As engineering projects become more complex, the need for skilled project managers has never been more critical. But here's the real question. Can technical professionals without formal project management training successfully lead these high-stakes projects? Well, today I'm joined by Wei Kwan, PMP, Program Manager at Agilent Technologies, and he's going to talk about the biggest challenges engineers face when stepping into project management. He'll give some proven strategies for passing the PMP exam and some key takeaways from his book, Simple Project Management for Noobs to Pros. So whether you're an engineer looking to transition into project management or a seasoned PM looking to sharpen your skills, this episode is packed with actionable insights that you will not want to miss. I'm your host, Anthony Fasano, and this is the AEC Project Management Podcast. Let's dive in. Now let me welcome our guest onto the show for today. Wei Kwan is a PMP. He's also a program manager at Agilent Technologies. Wei, welcome to the AEC Project Management Podcast.
Thank you for having me.
So Wei, maybe you could start off by telling us a little bit about yourself, your career journey, and kind of what led you to your current role as program manager at Agilent.
So I graduated in 1995, which is quite some time ago. So I graduated with a degree in mechanical engineering at Iowa State. And obviously, when you graduate with an engineering degree, you wanted to work in engineering. So that's what I did. So I worked as an engineer for about 5 years. And once after that, there was an opportunity to say, well, does anybody want to lead a project? So obviously you said, yeah, let's do it. So that's what I did. And interestingly enough, the first project that I did was in China. I was sent to China because during the 1990s, there was this big globalization program where people are basically outsourcing everything. During the 1980s, and at that time I was working for Hewlett Packard. We were doing printers. So obviously print a factory with about 150 employees. And at that time there was a boom. There were like orders coming from range from 100,000 to close to 1 million printers a month. So that's a crazy number. So obviously when you have that sort of numbers coming in, there's no way you can actually do it in one single factory. You actually have to do it in multiple factories. So I was leading a project. We had to do a project, and so the ones that I'm doing is in China. It has a volume of 30,000. So you ramp from making 4 or 5 printers to making 30,000 printers in a single month. So I took on that project, and interestingly enough, I was in China when 9/11 struck.
Oh, wow.
So that was, so I had a difficult time doing that. But the project was successful. And then I came back and of course, new and greater things. And then in 2008, I did something which everybody thought was the dumbest thing in the world. I left HP, which is supposedly the best company to work for at that time. And the reason I left is because I have an offer to actually do a startup. I was given an opportunity to do a startup of a powder metallurgy plant, something that I have no idea what it is. And very, very few people, I would guess, know even what it is. And I was doing with something called platinum. Again, everybody thought, oh, platinum, that's a jewelry. No, it's not. It's actually used in hard drives. So I did that, spent 3 years there, and then another opportunity came up where I will be able to join the medical industry. which is Agilent Technologies. So I left after I actually completed my project with the platinum powder, and then I moved to Agilent where I was working on something called a mass spectrometer, which again, that is something that almost nobody knows anything about. So I like to do stuff like that, the crazy stuff. So that's where I am. 14, 15 years later, I'm still here at Agilent.
Wow, that's great. And
Mm.
we'll dive into this a little bit more, but you were kind of thrown into project management. You
Uh-huh.
kind of became a project manager by fire, like I like to say. And
Uh-huh.
I think that can be a really good thing because I think the best way to become a project manager is to manage projects.
Uh-huh.
But we'll definitely dive into that some more as we go forward here. And I guess something I wanted to ask you about, Wei, is you have a lot of experience, as you mentioned, in new product introduction, kind of across
Mhm.
different industries. What would you say are some of the biggest challenges in bringing new technology to market? And how do some of your skills translate, to that from project management? Just talk about that experience a little bit.
Mm. Okay. So one of the things that when we dived into a project is that to acknowledge and really humble yourself that you don't know everything. And in most cases, when you go into a project, there will always, almost all the time, there will be one, two, and hopefully more experts who have been doing this, who have been doing the same thing for the last 5 years, 10 years, 20 years. And the interesting thing enough, I've been fortunate enough that many of those people are ever willing to help. So one of the things is so I went in to be project lead, but in no way do I know everything. There is absolutely no way. So you go in and be open and be candid and say, I know probably 10%, 20% because of all the books, because of the research I've done. The rest, I will have to rely on the team to help guide me along the way. What I can do is I will be able to listen to all of you, to all your opinions, all your thoughts. And from there, I will perhaps prepare a plan moving forward. And then I will need your help to guide me along the way. And in most cases, no, let me take that back. In all cases, that happened to be the best thing to do because they are willing to share. And one of the reasons why they are willing to share is probably because of bad experiences when managers come in and straight away the managers tell them what to do. And many of these experts, they prefer the other way around. They prefer saying that, hey, I've been doing this the last 5 years, 10 years. I know this better than you. And that is what a project manager should go. You should go in, listen to them, and say that I don't know enough. You guys probably know more than me, and then chart your way around. You will prepare the guide, you will prepare the charter, you will prepare the timeline, but along the way, seek these guys, ask these guys for help, saying that, hey, you guys are the experts. I'm just a lead. That's all I'm gonna do. So you tell me what to do, and we will work on this together.
I think that's awesome. I think that's a really important mindset for project managers, especially in some of the situations where you do have to deal with not just people that you're leading, but stakeholders. I know for me, working as a civil engineer, if I go into a community and I'm telling them what's best for their community, that's not a good approach, right? I mean,
Yes, absolutely.
they live there, they know the parks, they know the roadways, they know what's working, they know what's not working. And so if you can go in with the mindset of, we're working on this project where we want to improve your community, what are some of the things that you think would be beneficial to this project? They're going to give you great information and they're also going to be bought into the project and they're going to be there to help you. They're not going to be there to, fight you, so to speak. And so I think that, Wei makes an important point here is that as a project manager, go into the project and just kind of leave your ego behind and say, I don't know what I think I know, and,
Hmm.
other stakeholders on this project can really help me.
Hmm. Absolutely right. In fact, we get that experience because in Hewlett Packard, almost all the engineers have PhDs, many of them from Stanford, MIT. How are you going to compete with these guys? How are you going to tell them, hey, you have a PhD from MIT. I have a bachelor's degree in something. You can't compete with the guys there.
Right. Yeah. Yeah. That's great.
Yeah.
So, Wei, a lot of engineers, architects, technical professionals, they transition into project management without formal training.
Mhm.
If someone were to do that, what do you think are some of the common challenges that they're going to face? And how can they kind of develop the skills that they need to get around that and to be able to manage projects effectively?
I think one of the best ways to get your feet wet is not to actually go into the project immediately. That is why I find it absolutely lacking in industry today. So whether you are starting a project from scratch, or whether you're a new project manager or a project manager like me who has been doing this for 20 years, it doesn't matter, because if you don't do the steps right, you will have to repeat them sooner, most likely later, when things go to market. For example, if you didn't budget in the resource, trust me, you will need to budget in the resource. And if you're at a point of time where the manager tells you, oh, you need, for example, 100,000, and the manager says, why didn't you say this 6 months ago? Now we have no money left because you have spent it all. So, 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 so you will have to budget them. You will have, and then talking about scope. When you do your scope, when you do your resource planning, when you do your schedule planning, if you don't do it upfront, you will still have to do it later. And the worst time to be doing it is when you actually need to hand up a report saying that I need the scope, I need this amount of money. So that is the problem that we face today. So a good project manager will always have to do the planning upfront. And that is the one thing that we actually have to do. And here's the funny thing. What I learned is that it is perfectly fine to do all your planning and said you don't have enough. And that is the one thing I teach in my class, is that as long as you haven't spent the money, it's still fine to say, you know what, let's halt this project for a little while and spend more time planning, rather than starting something and then later finding out, oh, you made a boo-boo.
Hmm. Yeah. Yeah. I like that. And I think that's really important. And whether you get PM training or not, whether you have skills or not, you're always going to need a scope, schedule, and budget on your projects. And the
Absolutely.
earlier that you do it, the better. And I think one of the bigger pitfalls, and we'll talk about pitfalls later, but one of the bigger pitfalls is not nailing down the scope at the beginning of the project, or think you have
Mm-hmm.
the scope and maybe not confirming it with your client or the other
Mm-hmm.
stakeholders, right? And then all of a sudden,
Yes.
oh, I didn't know we had to design a whole nother, section of the project. We didn't include that in the price. And then everyone's like, oh, what do you mean you didn't include that in the price? And then you have a problem.
Yes.
So definitely good there. So, all right. So, Wei, I want to ask you about the PMP exam. It has a pretty notoriously high failure rate. Thinking back to when you went through the process, what are some of the strategies that helped you to pass the exam the first time? And, how can maybe professionals out there better prepare for it?
So what I did is we asked a lot of questions. So during so you actually, you probably need to, now you need to take a class for about 5 days. I think it's 40 hours class, something like that. So one of the things the instructor was kind enough was he actually have a session for us and said, ask me whatever you want on the PMP exam. And so we did. So we asked him, how long do you need to prepare for the exam? And he told us 3 to 6 months. And all of us got a shock. It's like, what? It's like, what on earth? What do you mean 3 to 6 months? He says, well, unless you're an absolute genius. And then he actually showed us a few of the questions that was being asked, sample questions. I think he showed us like 20 questions, and all of us flunked. We
Mm.
probably got 2, maybe 4 questions correct out of those 20 questions. And he said, and then he come up and said, well, you guys are not ready.
You need 6 more
and
months.
yes. And here's the interesting thing. That is only part 1. Okay, part 1 is knowing how to do the questions on paper. However, the PMP exam is actually done on a computer. And you would not believe that you can write faster on paper versus on the computer. So the exam is about 4 hours long. When I was doing it on paper, I can finish the 200 question paper in about 3 hours, 3.5 hours. On a computer based exam simulation, when I finish the test, I have probably 3 minutes left. Barely enough for me to
Wow.
check that I've answered all questions. So this is the one thing. And so my advice to anybody who has thinking of just doing the PMP is go and try out a computer simulated real exam for 4 hours long and see whether you have the stamina to complete it. Most people, me especially, by the second hour, by the third hour, my brain is fried. I wasn't able to handle the 4 hours. So you actually have to do it first time and then see your score. 60% for the first time is normal.
Wow.
And what the examiners actually told me is that you need to get a score between 85 and 90% before you attempt the real exam. Otherwise, whatever that you spent on the fees, on the exam fees, it is as good as gone. Don't waste your money. So I actually took about 3 exam simulation before I got around 80%. And then I thought, okay, 80% is good enough. I'm just going to sprint some more. And that is after doing close to 1,500 questions on paper. Then you take the exam. Then you do another few hundred questions. And then you take another exam simulation. And only when you reach or when your score is about 80%, 85%, 90%, only then you are ready. And that will probably give you a good chance of passing the PMP exam. If not, then you're absolutely not ready for it.
That's great. That's great. I mean, you know what? It's like running a marathon, right? You got to try it. You know, you can run around on a track, but when you're in the actual marathon, there's pressures and there's other
Yes.
people, right? It's a different thing.
Yes.
And I think it's a really good point about the computer-based test because we have a YouTube channel past the PE exam to help engineers get their PE license, and it's the same thing. It's now fully computer-based where it used to not be. So, you know, getting a pen and doing it on paper is one thing, but then when you try to translate that to the computer, you have to take into account how much more time it might take you,
Yes.
right? And I'm glad you said that because I think a lot of people might make the assumption that the computer is going to be faster.
Oh no, it's
Right.
way longer. Yeah. And here's a funny thing. The most difficult question is an essay question. So you will be given a essay that's like 500 words.
Wow.
And that essay is only one question. You have 200 questions and you will have at least 10 to 20 of those essay questions. And you're like, what's up with that? Shouldn't you have
This isn't
an
project
essay?
management.
This is in the PMP exam. And you know what? You actually have to look for that small little sentence or that 4 or 5 words to find the answer. And you're like, oh, so speed reading is absolutely essential. And here's the funny thing, you know, those trick questions where all the answers are almost exactly the same except for one word, it's like that. It's
Wow.
crazy.
Interesting. So, Wei, you've authored a book entitled Simple Project Management for Noobs to Pros. And in the book, you break down, you know, PM concepts in an accessible way for people. Can you maybe share a key lesson from your book that has really transformed the way that you manage projects and how maybe so that some of our listeners can think about maybe trying to apply that and what they're doing?
Okay, so I break it out into the same thing as the IPE MCC. So a large portion of the book is actually devoted to the planning. So when we start initiating is pretty simple. Once you know your project charter and once you have established your stakeholders, then the next step will be the planning. And that's where I actually put in probably at least 50% of the book is devoted on planning. And one of the key points I put in there, at any point of time, if you felt that during your planning that you feel that the project is going to be a failure, stop.
Hmm.
and reevaluate everything again. Because if you think, if and usually it's a gut feel, you know. So I actually put in a lot of questions, like for example, uh, how's your schedule? And I actually put in, these are the steps that you need to define your schedule. Do this and then go into it. And if you feel that, well, for example, I actually told my manager, my manager tells me that I need to finish this project in 6 months. But after I put in a detailed schedule, and then I realized this thing is going to take more than a year
Hmm.
rather than 6 months. Then I think it is time for you to take a step back and said that and explain to your manager or explain to yourself, saying that this project is going to fail. Because if I were to continue doing this, it's not going to be successful. So I should take a pause and ask for more time. And so my book actually went through that. So everything, so you plan everything upfront so that you know at the end of the day what you're getting. And based on that, then you continue the project because, well, you can continue, but you're actually setting up yourself for failure. And this is what I learned. And this is the same thing where I teach my class, saying that, you can do everything that you want, but at any point of time that you feel, whether it's a gut feel or it is a calculated schedule, a calculated scope that you are not able to do it, pause and seek help from your manager, seek help from experts, and ask them, this is what I found out. What do you think? What is your opinion? What are your thoughts? Should we continue or should we put a stop to this?
That's great. Yeah, and I love that. I mean, when we do our PM courses and we teach as well, we spend more time on the planning phases than the
Mhm.
back end because it's kind of like if
Yes.
you get it right up front, you're setting yourself on the right path. If you rush through the planning, you're only going to have problems down the
Yes.
road, right?
Eventually.
Eventually. But I like what Wei said about it allows you to, find the red flags, the things that you don't feel good about early in a project so you can address them maybe with your supervisor, your manager. Like, I know you want to stick to this budget, but I just don't think it's going to work. Or I know we need have a timeline of this many months. I just don't think it's going to work. And we need to add in some more time for that. Right. So
Mhm.
that is an important part of project, maybe the most important part of project management, planning out your project successfully, because it's better to figure something out and get something wrong in the beginning of the project than when you're too deep and there's, materials ordered, you're on a project site, there's the different things that are now at risk later on in the
Mhm.
project, which can be very dangerous.
Mhm.
So a lot of these projects in the world today way are growing in complexity, right? There's
Mm.
more moving parts, whether it comes to more money involved, there's AI involved now, there's all kinds of different things, which means we need better communication, right? We need to leverage technology. We need to kind of streamline our workflows. So what are some recommendations that you can make for engineering professionals, technical professionals, and how to do some of these things, how to get better at communicating, how to leverage technology in the world we live in today where projects just keep getting more complex?
That is a very good question. And I think many of us are also having this problem where if you look at the technologies today, previously, technologies are always almost in silos. Some products are hardware, for example, vacuum cleaners, typewriters. Those are mainly hardware. And then some products are software, Microsoft Office, AI. Those are mainly software. Now, right now, what we are doing is everything is combining the two, hardware as well as software. And we see this in the electric vehicles, drones, whatever technology that you're talking about. So, and what happens is that we need to talk to each other. And what we find out is that a lot of the problems arise because people are still operating in the same way in silos. So we absolutely need to have a discussion upfront. And unfortunately, this can't be done at our level. For me, as a project manager, I have the ability because I can talk to the people in hardware who is able to talk to people in software as well. And we need to form a team and say that, hey, we are working on this together. Let's talk and discuss what we can do as a team rather than operating in silos.
That's great. Yeah, I love that. It's really understanding as a project manager that you do have to be that connector and facilitator, right, between different groups, different parties, different stakeholders. And I do
But
think
let me say that it's not easy. It's
no,
very
it's
difficult.
not. It is difficult for a lot of reasons. I mean, like you said, there's hardware, there's software, there's technology, there's people with different work styles and personalities, right? I mean, that's thing about project management that I always say is a big misnomer is that the word people is not in that phrase, project management, right? But it requires a lot of people interaction if you're going to be
Mhm.
successful in your projects. And so
Yes.
it's something to work on. So, Wei, looking ahead, what are some of the emerging trends in kind of engineering and project management that you think are going to have the biggest impact on professionals moving forward with everything that's evolving in the world today? What would you recommend to project managers that they're going to need to, skills that they're going to need to develop or things they're going to be need to be aware of with changes that are coming?
I think it's more on the soft skills. I think many of us, when we actually go into a new project, is we don't listen enough. There are sufficient information out there. We just have to stop and listen. One recent episode that I have is I'm actually doing a project where I'm actually transferring a product into China. And interestingly enough, there was an engineer who is slightly prejudiced towards the Chinese. And one of the things and I asked him to perhaps guide some of these engineers in what you're doing. He said no, I don't want to do it. So obviously it's difficult because there is a constant fear that if I were to give provide my knowledge to this new team, then he will be out of the job, something like that. And then, so what I actually told him is that don't look at it that way, because look at it as you're actually forming a team so that he will be able to take that knowledge, he will improve on that knowledge, and then now you absolutely have the time to do something better, to innovate more. So that's how you should be looking at it. And he relented. So he actually went in, and after talking to the team in China, he actually felt good, saying that that guy is not bad. He's pretty smart, uh, and he seems trustworthy enough that I can teach him, and he will be able and he will be able to do that. And now that frees up time for me to do new stuff. So I think that is the one thing that we probably need as an engineer is to look forward rather than looking sideways or looking backwards, because that's the only way forward. That's the only way for us to move forward, for us to improve ourselves.
Yeah, I think that's great. And that's a perfect example of how, you know, everything that you need as a project manager is not going to be found in the PMBOK or in a book, right?
Mhm.
Like some of these soft skills and these interactions are things you have to develop and come with time and come with project experience. But they're a critical part of like moving your projects forward in the right direction and being able to deal with some of these people scenarios
Yes,
that
yes.
you're going to inevitably have to deal with on your projects.
Mhm.
All right, Wei, it's time for our final question here, which we call the PM pitfalls question. What would you say is one of the bigger pitfalls that you see project managers deal with? And how do you recommend that they overcome it or avoid it or try to minimize it on their projects? What are one of the bigger pitfalls?
I think the biggest pitfall is the lack of forward planning. So, like I mentioned before, whether you like it or not, if you didn't plan for something earlier, don't worry about it. You will have to plan for it later, or you will find out later that you absolutely need it. So I think so that is the reason why I think most projects fail is because the upfront planning wasn't there. And I think whether you are and the more complex the project is, the more planning, the more upfront planning needs to be done. And one cannot do everything by yourself. So you actually have to have a team to support you, preferably a team of subject matter experts, and preferably a good management support. Once you have those two, you can go far.
Excellent, excellent. So, once again, he's Wei Kwan. He is the author of the book Simple Project Management for Noobs to Pros. He has a website, which we'll also share in the show notes and in the comments, where you can read about some articles and find his book. Wei, I want to thank you so much for taking some time out of your day and spending it with us here on the AEC Project Management Podcast.
Thank you. Thanks for having me.
I hope you enjoyed my conversation with Wei. He's got some great insights, especially around project planning, which is so important. If you enjoyed our conversation, please subscribe to our channel here. We do put out videos like this on a weekly basis to help engineers become better project managers and leaders. I'll see you next week.